The spears awaken, dawn of the Zulu Kingdom. The sun was just beginning to rise over the rolling hills of southern Africa, painting the horizon with streaks of crimson and gold. Mist clung to the valleys like a veil, and in that quiet hour, the land seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to be born among the scattered Nguni tribes. Whispers spread of a young warrior who dreamed not just of victory, but of unity, discipline, and destiny. His name was Shaka Kasinzangakona, a man whose legend would shape the soul of Africa. Before we move further into this journey of honor and blood, tell us in the comments where you re-watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Hour of War for more incredible stories of history's greatest battles. In those early days, Zululand was not yet a kingdom, merely a tapestry of small clans, each ruled by its own chief, divided by rivalries and traditions of vengeance. The land was rich, but the people were fractured. Raids between neighboring clans were constant, cattle theft was a way of life, and loyalty shifted like the wind. But within this chaos, the young Shaka saw a vision that no one else dared to imagine, a nation bound by discipline, strength, and an unbreakable spirit. Born to a minor Zulu chief and an outcast mother, Shaka's childhood was marked by humiliation and hardship. Mocked, hunted, and rejected, he found refuge in training his body and mind. Every wound he suffered became a lesson. Every humiliation became fuel. By the time he came of age, he had learned to endure pain like stone and move with the precision of a lion. When war erupted between the Mathethwa and Ndwando tribes, Shaka served as a warrior under Chief Dingaswayo of the Mathethwa. It was here that his brilliance began to emerge. Unlike the other warriors who fought with long throwing spears and scattered easily, Shaka envisioned a new form of warfare, one that relied on close combat, precision, and psychological control. He shortened the spear into a deadly stabbing weapon called the Ikwa, named after the sound it made when pulled from an enemy's body. He introduced large cowhide shields, disciplined formations, and relentless training. Shaka believed that fear and chaos were the true enemies of a warrior. He transformed the battlefield into a dance of coordination, where every step, every breath, every strike was part of a deadly rhythm. His methods shocked the tribes around him, swift, brutal, and utterly unstoppable. Word of this new kind of warrior spread like fire through the savannah. Dingaswayo saw in Shaka not just a soldier, but a leader. And when fate took the Mathethwa chief's life in battle, Shaka rose to claim his destiny. Returning to the Zulu clan, he took command through both diplomacy and iron will, forging alliances and crushing resistance. One by one, the scattered tribes of the region bent their knee, not out of fear alone, but out of awe. A new name echoed across the valleys: Zulu Kashaka, the founder of a nation. By 1818, the Zulu Kingdom had emerged from obscurity to dominance. Warriors trained day and night under Shaka's ruthless standards. No man could marry until he proved himself in war. No army could rest until its enemies were crushed. Every regiment, or ibutho, lived together, trained together, and fought as one, a living weapon forged by unity. The neighboring tribes watched with both admiration and dread. The once scattered people of the hills were now a storm sweeping across the land. To the north, the Ndwandwe Kingdom prepared for war, determined to end this new Zulu threat before it grew unstoppable. But Shaka had already seen them coming. His spies moved like shadows, bringing back word of every enemy movement, every strategy, every weakness. And so the stage was set for the first great test of the Zulu nation, the battle that would prove whether this rising kingdom was destined to stand among empires or vanish like smoke in the wind. If you're enjoying this journey into the rise of the Zulu warriors, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because in the next part, the spears of Shaka will meet their first great trial against an enemy determined to destroy them. Blood and honor. Shaka's empire unleashed. The sun rose over the plains of KwaZulu, spilling gold across the dew-wet grass. In the distance, the beat of shields echoed like thunder rolling across the hills. A young warrior stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Shaka Kona, son of a minor chief, but destined to carve an empire from chaos. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? Comment below and join the warriors of history. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the Hour of War for more untold tales of courage and empire. The land of the Zulus was one of scattered tribes, each living by the spear, each fearing the next raid that could end their bloodline. When Shaka returned from his years serving under the Mthethwa chief Dingiswayo, he carried not only battle scars but a vision. He would unite his people, forge discipline from disorder, and turn the Zulu from a fragile clan into the fiercest army Africa had ever seen. He began with training ruthless, relentless, transforming warriors into living weapons. The long throwing spears were replaced with the short stabbing ikwa, designed for close combat. The shields grew broader and stronger, used not just for defense but for crushing enemies under pressure. Shaka drilled his men day and night, teaching them to move as one, a deadly, coordinated storm. Whispers of his reforms spread quickly. Other tribes laughed, calling his warriors slaves to his madness. But when they met the Zulu in battle, laughter turned to horror. The bullhorn formation, a central chest locking the enemy while the horns circled and crushed, became legend. In every engagement, Shaka's army struck with precision, cutting down those who stood in the way of his dream. By the time the grass turned dry and brittle from the summer sun, Shaka's victories had multiplied. Villages that once defied him now knelt in submission. Chiefs who mocked him now offered tribute, sending cattle and daughters as signs of surrender. Shaka accepted all, but his eyes were fixed farther north, toward the lands still untouched by his banner. Inside his mind burned a paradox, ambition, and vengeance. The pain of rejection by his father's clan still haunted him. Every conquest, every battle was not only for glory, but for redemption. The Zulu nation was his weapon against the humiliation of his youth. One night, as fires burned low in the royal kraal, Shaka stood alone beneath the stars. His generals waited, uncertain whether to approach. Finally, he spoke. The spear that hesitates dies. The tribe that divides falls. Tomorrow we march. And march they did, across valleys and rivers, over the corpses of their enemies, until the land itself seemed to tremble beneath their song of war. Women sang his praises. Children danced in the dust, chanting his name, Shaka Zulu, Shaka the lion. But behind the songs hid fear. Those who disobeyed his laws were executed without mercy. Discipline was his religion, loyalty his demand. Even his closest warriors trembled before his gaze. Yet his genius could not be denied. Shaka transformed war into art. He built a state bound not by bloodlines, but by obedience and courage. In the process, he reshaped Southern Africa's destiny, setting in motion a storm that would one day bring him face to face with the greatest empire on earth, Britain. For now, though, the empire was only a shadow on the horizon. Within Zululand, all trembled under the weight of his will. The horns of the bull had spread across the land, and every enemy fell before them. But greatness, like the rising sun, always casts long shadows, and Shaka's were beginning to grow. Soon his empire would reach its peak, and the same power that made him a god among men would begin to consume him. For every victory brought blood, and every battle demanded a price. The drums of destiny beat louder with each passing day. The Zulu Kingdom had risen, but the cost of its honor was yet to be paid. The empire arrives, Britain's shadow over Zululand. The dawn broke calm and golden over the rolling hills of Zululand. But beneath the morning silence, the air carried a strange weight, the smell of change, of something foreign drifting across the horizon. To the north, the red coats of the British Empire were moving. Columns of soldiers, rifles glinting like a forest of iron under the African sun, began their march toward the kingdom that Shaka had built and his successors ruled. Before we dive into this turning chapter of history, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below, and make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Hour of War for more stories that shaped the world. For decades, Britain had watched Africa from afar, first with curiosity, then with calculation. The Zulu Kingdom, once a distant name whispered by traders, had become a force too powerful to ignore. Its disciplined regiments, its proud kings, and its vast lands stood in the path of British ambition. The empire, stretching from India to the Cape, wanted order, and to Britain, order meant control. In 1877, as Britain tightened its grip over South Africa, Zululand remained defiantly independent. King Cetshwayo, heir to Shaka's legacy, ruled with both wisdom and iron will. He kept his army trained, his warriors loyal, and his borders sacred. But British officials, led by Sir Bartle Frere, the High Commissioner for Southern Africa, saw the Zulu not as equals, but as an obstacle to imperial expansion. Frere sent emissaries to Cetshwayo, demanding impossible concessions. "Disband your army," they said. "Accept British oversight. Surrender your sovereignty." But Cetshwayo refused. "I am the child of Shaka," he replied through his envoys. "I will not let my father's kingdom be taken by paper words." Back in London, the empire prepared its pretext for war. Newspapers spoke of the Zulu threat of savage warriors at the borders of an empire-defending civilization. Yet, in truth, it was not defense, it was hunger. The British wanted to unify South Africa under their rule, and the Zulu stood proudly in the way. By the end of 1878, the drums of war were beating once again across Zululand. The British issued an ultimatum to Cetshwayo: "Disband your army in 30 days, or face invasion." The Zulu king's reply was silence. And silence, to the empire, was defiance. But when the 30 days passed, the British armies crossed the Buffalo River. Their red banners fluttered against the blue African sky. Behind them came wagons of ammunition, cannons, and long lines of disciplined soldiers. Ahead of them lay a proud people armed with spears and shields, but with hearts that burned hotter than gunpowder. At the great royal kraal, the Zulu warriors assembled. The sound of Isimbongi, the royal poets, filled the air, praising their ancestors and calling upon Shaka's spirit to watch over them. Thousands of warriors danced in unison, striking their shields with short stabbing spears. Dust rose like smoke from the earth as the song of defiance shook the valley. King Cetshwayo stood tall, his face unreadable. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We have fought before. We will fight again. The land of our fathers does not belong to strangers." To the British, the invasion was a campaign. To the Zulu, it was survival. The empire came with rifles and discipline, but the Zulu came with pride and courage that no empire could measure. As the first columns pushed deeper into the heart of Zululand, the soldiers sang British marching songs, confident in their superiority. Yet, unknown to them, tens of thousands of Zulu warriors were already watching, hidden in the tall grass. Moving silently through the hills, waiting for the command to strike. The stage was set for one of the most shocking confrontations of the 19th century, where spears would clash against rifles, and the mighty empire would learn the cost of underestimating a nation forged by blood and honor. The empire had arrived, and in its shadow the storm of war was about to erupt. The Battle of Isandawana. Spears against the empire, the morning of January 22, 1879, began with a deceptive calm. The British camp at Isandawana lay sprawled across the golden plains of Zululand, its white tents shining beneath the African sun. Soldiers went about their routines, cleaning rifles, tending horses, writing letters home, unaware that death was already closing in from the hills. Before we continue into this unforgettable clash, take a moment. Where are you watching from? Comment below and share your thoughts with the Hour of War. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring history's most powerful moments back to life. The British invasion had begun with confidence. Lord Chelmsford, commander of the expedition, divided his forces. Convinced that the Zulu were no match for modern rifles and artillery, he marched east with half his men to chase a rumored enemy movement, leaving Colonel Paulin and around 1,800 soldiers to guard the camp at Isandlwana. It was a fatal mistake. Hidden among the tall grass and ridges surrounding the camp, more than 20,000 Zulu warriors waited, silent, patient, invisible. They had moved for days, barefoot across the burning earth, guided by ancestral songs and an unbreakable will. Their shields were black and white, their spears gleaming with the light of the rising sun. The horns of the bull had formed once again the same deadly formation Shaka himself had devised decades earlier. At mid-morning, a British scout spotted a few figures moving on a nearby ridge. Thinking they were only a small Zulu party, he sent word back to the camp. But as the soldiers mounted their positions, the horizon suddenly came alive. From every direction, the hills erupted with warriors. The earth itself seemed to roar as thousands of feet thundered across the plain, chanting war cries that echoed like the heartbeat of Africa. "Form ranks," shouted Paulin. Lines of redcoats loaded their Martini Henry rifles, their faces pale under the brutal sun. Volley after volley cracked through the air, cutting down wave after wave of Zulu warriors, but still they came. Their numbers seemed endless, their courage beyond belief. The British lines began to bend. Ammunition wagons jammed. Orders were lost in the chaos. Smoke filled the camp, choking soldiers as bullets and spears found their marks. The Ikwa short stabbing spears pierced through red uniforms. In minutes, the camp turned into a storm of death. One officer shouted, "Stand fast, stand fast." But there was nowhere left to stand. The Zulu encirclement tightened like a noose. The left horn swept around the ridge, cutting off retreat. The right horn crashed into the center. Within an hour, the mighty British formation had shattered. The few survivors who tried to flee were hunted down along the river. Flags fell, drums went silent. When the dust finally settled, more than 1,300 British soldiers lay dead. An entire battalion erased in a single morning. The Zulu had done what no African army had ever done before. They had annihilated a modern British force in open battle. Atop the hill of Isandlwana, the Zulu commanders stood victorious. They raised their spears to the sky, saluting the spirits of their ancestors. Songs of triumph echoed through the valleys, songs that spoke of Shaka's legacy, of unity, and of vengeance fulfilled. But victory came at a terrible cost. Nearly 1,000 Zulu warriors also fell that day, and as the sun dipped behind the mountains, their king Cetshwayo, far away in Ulandi, received the news with mixed emotion. He had ordered his people to defend their land, but he knew that such a victory would bring the empire's fury like never before. In London, shockwaves rippled through the government. Newspapers screamed of the Zulu massacre. The British pride, the pride of empire, had been wounded deeply. Reinforcements were ordered at once, and with them would come vengeance. But the Battle of Isandawana was not just a fight, it was a message. It showed the world that courage, unity, and discipline could stand against even the greatest empire. But for the Zulu, it was also the beginning of their downfall. For as the smoke cleared over Isandawana, another fight was already beginning, a desperate defense at a small mission station called Rorke's Drift. The siege of Rorke's Drift, 150 against 4,000. The afternoon sun fell like a hot coin over the rolling veldt of Natal Patar, and the smoke from Isandawana still hung on the air thick bitter. A taste of blood and iron. News had travelled like a wound through the countryside. The main British column had been shattered. Their camp at Isandlwana was gone. In the quiet that followed, distant drums of the Zulu army beat a relentless cadence, and the horizon itself seemed to move with thousands of dark shapes pressing forward across the ridges. At the ford known as Rorke's Drift, a mission station that straddled the Buffalo River, a small garrison prepared for the night. It was not a fort, but a handful of buildings, a supply depot, a makeshift hospital, and a handful of troop-sick men convalescing from earlier skirmishes. A detail of Royal Engineers and B Company of the 24th Regiment. They numbered barely 150 doctors, clerks, stokers, a few riflemen, and a scattering of officers, not expecting anything more than the usual patrols through the brush. Their commander, Lieutenant John Chart of the Royal Engineers, was practical and anxious by nature. Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, a subaltern of the 24th, was steady and stubborn. Together they would hold a line that many thought could not be held. Before we go deeper into this night of fire and steel, tell us where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if this story grips you, hit like, share with a friend, and subscribe to the Hour of War so you don't miss the next chapter of history's most dramatic clashes. The day had begun with the routine of service bales of biscuit and mealie bags stacked, hospital doors closed against the heat, the troops writing letters home. But by late afternoon, scouts brought uneasy reports. Zulu war parties were moving, many columns converging like tributaries toward the drift. There was no relief from the truth. Men at Rorke's Drift would soon face the aftermath of Isandawana. The defenders improvised with grim efficiency mealie bags, and biscuit boxes were piled into hasty breastworks. Doors were barricaded with timber, ammunition distributed carefully. Medical stores were carried into the structures. The wounded were propped up to see the sky one last time. As dusk fell, the first waves arrived, scouts sweeping the edges, probing the perimeter with cries and sudden, fleeting attacks. The Zulu came not as a single, disorderly mob, but in disciplined bodies, skirting the farm tracks, using long experience of the ground. Their war song rose like a living thing, a keening that belonged to the earth itself and not to any man. The thick dark of night would not be an ally to the British defenders. It would be a curtain behind which the foe could move close and vanish. They would have to find light in their own hands. When the main attack began, it did so in a manner both terrible and precise. The Zulu surged in crashing waves, their advance timed to sow confusion and exhaustion. They struck the huts and the barricades with spear and shield, testing weak points, seeking where the defenders were thin. The defenders responded with disciplined volleys. The Martini Henry rifles cracked and burned. Bullets took men from the ranks of the attackers and tore holes in the night. The wounded of Isandawana pressed into service as part of the defense, fired until their hands shook. Men who had once loitered in the canteen found themselves grasping a rifle and holding it with a fury only desperate fear can forge. Inside the makeshift hospital, horror and courage crossbred. Men dragged the wounded into shelter, while others, with faces smeared with soot and blood, repulsed attackers from the windows. One moment, a sentinel would shout and bring a palmful of silence. The next, a Zulu spear would protrude through a splintered door, and a man would be lost behind the smoke. The tenacity of the defense lay in such moment-small hands of resistance thrown into the maw of chaos, feeding a chain of stubbornness that would cascade into survival. Several assaults came under cover of moonless sky, and each time the British line, exhausted and dwindling, found a way to press back. Officers rallied men, moved cartridges in bitter, sweaty hands, and ordered cool, controlled firing that turned charging lines into collapsing waves. At the stone store and the hospital, defenders bled and defied, charred paced like a watchful clock, directing parties to plug breaches. Bromhead Face hollow with determination led men where the fight was hottest, his voice lost in the thunder. Through the long hours, instances of courage multiplied into legend. A corporal or a sapper would stand exposed covering comrades as they reloaded. A makeshift bayonet charge at a broken gate would send attackers scattering. A handful of men, trapped in a burning room, would fight to the last with a calm so fierce it stunned the onlookers. The Zulu were relentless wolfish in numbers, pressing point after point, but their bravery met with stubborn, steady British discipline, or it met death. For each wave broken, the defenders paid a price. For each assault repelled, the men counted another brother gone. The night became an ordeal of attrition, and the heat of rifles and the taste of gunpowder filled the mouths of defenders. At times, the din was almost unbearable, the stamping of feet outside. The metallic rattle of bayonets, cries of the wounded, the crack of shot, the dull thud of bodies meeting earth. Yet through that cacophony, discipline shone, lines reformed, a door was boarded, a wounded voice barked an order. It was a defense sewn together by raw will. As dawn ghosted the eastern sky, the intensity of the assault thinned. The Zulu had thrown everything into the night, and now, at sunrise, they fell back whether by exhaustion, heavy casualties, or the sight of reinforcements on distant risers, none could say with certainty. When the smoke cleared, over 500 Zulu lay dead upon the veldt, and many more wounded. The defenders counted their own toll-torn faces, missing fingers, scorched uniforms, and a tally of the dead that made a hush descend upon the living. In the lean light, survivors wept and mended, shouted and prayed, and tried to fathom why fortune had favored them. The siege of Rorke's Drift seared into the imagination of empires and natives alike. In Britain it would be told as an epitome of courage, a handful of men standing like a bulwark of iron against a horde and holding. Medals would be struck. Songs would be sung in honor of the few who held the line. For the Zulu, the story was different. Their victory at Isandlwana was immense. And Rorke's Drift was a costly, brutal engagement, a demonstration of their staggering bravery and sacrifice in a fight for the land they loved. Yet victory and defeat braided into a larger warp. The British reinforcements summoned in the weeks that followed would swell into a force that would eventually march back across Zululand with a new appetite for revenge and discipline. The momentum of empire, bruised but not broken, would pivot into a ruthless campaign that would outlast any single battle. The station itself, battered and bloodstained, would stand as a monument and a warning. Small men can, for a time, perform miracles of endurance. Empires can be stunned. But the costs of combat translate into histories that wound both victor and vanquished. Rorke's Drift was a night of miracles, of deaths, and of a stubborn human will that refused to be swallowed. The fall of the Zulu nation, the empire strikes back. The smoke of Rorke's Drift had barely cleared when the British Empire began to move again, this time with fury in its heart and vengeance in its mind. London had been humiliated by the defeat at Isandlwana, and the press roared with anger. The call went out across the seas, send reinforcements. End this war. By February 1879, ships began to arrive at the port of Durban. Soldiers in red coats stepped ashore, disciplined, battle-hardened, and burning for redemption. Columns of artillery, engineers, and cavalry assembled under the relentless African sun. The British were no longer underestimating their enemy. They came to destroy it. At the same time, in the deep valleys of Zululand, the warriors of King Cetshwayo prepared once more. They sharpened spears, repaired shields, and gathered in the shadows of the great hills. The king's word had gone forth. Fight if you must, but protect the heart of the nation. Cetshwayo did not crave bloodshed, he sought survival. He knew what was coming, the full weight of an empire that stretched across continents. Before we move further, my friends, take a moment to tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If you love these real stories of war and courage, like and subscribe to the Hour of War so you never miss the next chapter of history. The British now moved with method and machinery. The sound of hammers and wheels echoed as they built forts at every crossing, laying down supply lines and telegraphs. General Lord Chelmsford, who had faced humiliation at Isandlwana, was determined to erase it with blood and steel. He restructured his forces, trained his men to face ambushes, and pushed inland with 3 massive columns. The Zulu warriors watched from the high grass, their eyes sharp as eagles. They had no guns to match the British rifles, no cannons to answer their shells, but they had courage, discipline, and the memory of their ancestors. Each regiment knew its role, each warrior his oath, to fight until the last breath for the land of the king. As March turned into April, the British advanced toward Isho, where a small garrison had been trapped by Zulu warriors for months. The relief column fought through ambushes, losing men to arrows and fever, but they broke through at last. The Zulus melted into the hills, conserving strength for the battles yet to come. The rains came and went, and by June the grass was dry and the skies clear. The British began their final march toward the royal capital, Ulundi. On their way, they burned villages and seized cattle, the lifeblood of the Zulu. Every kraal that smoked was a message. Resistance would cost everything. In the royal kraal, King Cetshwayo stood in silence as his advisers argued. Some urged him to surrender, others to strike first. He listened, his face heavy with sorrow. If we fight, he said, we fight for our children's memory. If we do not, we die forgotten. His words became a command. The last great Impis regiments of the old order gathered again. Men who had survived Isandlwana and Kambula now took up their shields one more time. Mothers wept as their sons went out to the plains, knowing few would return. The drums of war beat once more, echoing through valleys that had seen centuries of blood and glory. By late June, the British reached the White Umfolozi River. Scouts reported movement. The Zulu were near. They had chosen their ground for the final stand. And as dawn rose on July 4, 1879, the Empire and the Kingdom faced each other one last time. The Zulu army, nearly 20,000 strong, advanced with their shields gleaming in the sunlight, singing the songs of Shaka and the ancestors. The British formed into a hollow square, cannons at the corners, Gatling guns ready, ranks tight and steady. Inside, the Union Jack waved over an army that had come not to conquer, but to crush. The first Zulu charge came like thunder. Spears flashed, voices roared, and the ground trembled. But the British guns spoke louder. Rifles cracked in relentless rhythm, the Gatlings screamed, and artillery shells burst among the charging ranks. The Impis broke against the wall of fire like waves against rock. Still they came, again and again. The courage of the Zulu was beyond belief. They closed the distance, reached the British lines, fell only feet from their enemies. But bravery could not stop bullets, and in the end, courage alone was not enough. When the smoke cleared, the plains were silent except for the cries of the wounded. Thousands of Zulu warriors lay dead, their spears shattered, their shields torn. The might of the British Empire had done its work. Ulundi was in flames. The empire had struck back, and the heart of Zululand was broken. Cetshwayo fled into the wilderness, hunted by soldiers who would not rest until he was found. The once proud Zulu army was gone, scattered like dust before the storm. The war that had begun in defiance now ended in ashes. But though the empire had won, it could not erase what the world had witnessed, the courage of a people who faced an empire with nothing but faith, unity, and spears. The British flag flew over Zululand, but even in victory, their officers spoke with quiet respect. They fought like lions, one wrote, and indeed they had it, the last king of spears, the end of Zululand's. The sun was setting over the scorched plains of Zululand when the final echoes of war faded into the wind. The once proud regiments of King Cetshwayo had fallen silent, their songs of battle replaced by the mourning of widows and the cries of orphaned children. The empire had triumphed, but at a cost that could never be measured in numbers. King Cetshwayo campaigned, the last great ruler of the Zulu nation, was on the run. After the devastating defeat at Ulundi, he moved through the wilderness with a handful of loyal followers, avoiding British patrols that scoured the hills and forests. Each night he slept under the stars, a hunted man in his own land. Yet his spirit remained unbroken, for in his heart he still believed that a nation could not die as long as its people remembered who they were. In the burned ruins of Ulundi, British soldiers marched among the ashes, the Union Jack fluttering over the remains of what had once been the centre of a mighty kingdom. The empire had claimed victory, but even among its ranks there was a sense of uneasy silence. Officers who had fought through the campaign spoke of the bravery of the enemy with a rare kind of respect. "They faced us with nothing but courage," wrote one captain. "Their bodies fell, but their pride never did." By August 1879, the Zulu War was officially declared over. The British divided Zululand into 13 smaller chiefdoms, placing puppet rulers who swore loyalty to the crown. It was a strategy of empire to break unity by breeding division. But the land itself, scarred by fire and blood, refused to forget. The king was taken prisoner. He stood tall before his captors, wearing the remains of his royal cloak, his face lined with fatigue but his eyes still bright with pride. The British officer who took his sword wrote later, "I have never seen such dignity in defeat." Cetewayo was transported to Cape Town and then to the distant city of London, the heart of the empire that had destroyed his own. For the people of Britain, he became a curiosity. Crowds gathered to see the Zulu king, the man who had once defied an empire. Newspapers described him as both savage and noble. He met Queen Victoria at Osborne House, and she, impressed by his composure, ordered that he be treated with respect. Cetewayo pleaded for the right to return to his homeland, to rule his people again in peace. His words moved many in Britain. In time, the pressure from missionaries, journalists, and politicians led to his partial restoration. In 1883, 4 years after his capture, Cetewayo returned to Zululand, but what awaited him was not the kingdom he had known. By 1884, he was attacked in his kraal by rebels loyal to his rival, Zibibu, wounded and betrayed. The last king of the Zulu fled into the night once again. He reached the Nkandla forest, where he lived quietly for a few months, tended by those few who still believed in him. Then, one cold February morning in 1884, King Cetewayo died. Some say of a broken heart, others of poison. His death marked the true end of the Zulu nation's independence. Yet his story did not die with him. Among his people, songs continued to be sung, songs of bravery. Of the great battles, of the time when the spears of the Zulu had challenged the guns of an empire. The empire itself would one day fade, but the legend of the Zulu would endure. Generations later, the world would look back on that war not merely as a colonial conquest, but as a testament to courage, to the will of a people who stood for their freedom when the whole world was against them. Even today, the hills of KwaZulu-Natal whisper their stories. Travelers who walk through Isandlwana can still feel the wind that once carried the cries of battle. The earth itself seems to remember it, and so the legacy of Cetewayo lives on, not as a defeated king, but as a symbol of resistance, of dignity in the face of overwhelming power. His warriors may have fallen, but their honor stands eternal. The empire won the war, but the Zulu won immortality. History would call it the Zulu War, but to those who lived it, it was the fight for the soul of a nation. To everyone watching the Hour of War, this marks the end of our journey through one of history's most powerful and emotional conflicts. If this story moved you, remember, history is not just about battles. It's about people, courage, and the timeless struggle for freedom. So share, and subscribe to the Hour of War to keep these voices alive. For tomorrow, we'll begin a new chapter of the human story. From another battlefield, another age, and another empire. Thank you for walking this road with us. The Zulu drums may have fallen silent, but their echo still calls across time.